from Goose Lane Editions. It was an incredible read. I am thrilled that you're all joining us via Instagram and via this Zoom link. I'm going to start by acknowledging the land from where we are joining you. Junction Reads exists in Toronto, which is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabeg, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. Sheila joins us from Ottawa, which is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. As settlers and newcomers, we acknowledge and accept our responsibility to care for the land and its resources, while also recognizing the continued displacement and colonization of First Nations peoples across Turtle Island. We are very grateful to work in the community on their territory. We also recognize our responsibility as treaty people to meaningfully engage in the continuous process of truth and reconciliation. We urge the Canada Council for the Arts to further their initial response to call number 83 and increase their funding to projects and works that contribute to the reconciliation process. We also ask anyone joining us today to support the work of Indigenous writers by purchasing their books and asking your local library to expand their catalogs to include a wider range of books by Indigenous artists. Sheila James, welcome to Junction Reads. I'm so thrilled to have you. I appreciated this novel on so many levels. I can't wait to talk about it. But before we hear you read, I'm hoping that you will share with everyone what you're currently reading.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's really great to be here and to see so many people join us virtually from wherever you are. So interesting that you mentioned supporting Indigenous authors, because I am reading Métis author Connor Kerr, his new piece called Prairie Edge. And I was just telling Allison that Connor was supposed to be one of the readers with me at the launch at the Ottawa Writers Festival last May. And unfortunately, Connor got sick with COVID, so had to cancel that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to just get down and read his book because I missed that wonderful opportunity. But yeah, Prairie Edge by Connor Kerr. Thank you.
There you go. And now we're going to hear you read. But before that, I am going to share your impressive biography. Sheila James is a multidisciplinary artist born in the UK and raised in Nova Scotia by parents who hail from Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, India. The author of 2 books, OUTCASTE by Goose Lane Editions and a short story collection, In the Wake of Loss, which was a finalist for the Ottawa Book Awards. James's media works have been screened and broadcast internationally to acclaim, including Unmapping Desire, a joint winner of the Aqua Award for Best Lesbian Short Film at Toronto's Inside Out Festival. In addition to her film and video work, James has also authored several stage plays, including Canadian Monsoon, one of the first plays in Toronto to be written and directed by a South Asian woman, and recorded Radio Kids, a children's album of 10 original songs. Over the past 20 years, James has led innovative equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives through her company, DEVI, and in institutions including the Canada Council for the Arts. A holder of an MFA and LLM, Sheila James currently lives in Ottawa. Now we get to
Thank you.
read. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for hosting me today. And once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. So I'm going to read from my novel, Outcast. And even though there's an E on it, the pronunciation is just cast, so it's a little misleading that way. But this was published by Goose Lane Editions in May of 2024. And the book begins, it is a time-hopping novel. It begins in 1952 with a prologue that is set in Mahbubnagar. So I'm going to read you the prologue. Malika aimed her rifle. She lay astride the branch of a banyan tree with her sari hitched high above her knees. Her thighs circled the limb as her belly pressed against its smooth bark. A canopy of leaves hid her from the hundreds of people gathering on the road below. They were waiting to glimpse the news collector and his motorcade. Malika was also waiting. It was rumored that the district collector was traveling with his family, with young children, perhaps the same age as hers. If his children were present, they would certainly witness the death of their father, but they would survive. The car came into view. The district collector was seated diagonally behind the chauffeur, alone in the back, perfectly positioned to take the shot in his left temple. An easy kill. No unintended casualties. Malika drew in her breath as tension knotted between her shoulder blades. The stock of her rifle grazed her cheek. Just as her finger pulsed the trigger, the district collector turned his head upwards. Malika recognized Rayappa. So that starts the book. And then we jump to Toronto, 1997. And here we meet Erwin, 70-year-old Erwin Peter. We also find out that he's the father of his adult children, Jaya and Anasuya. And he's also the grandfather to 30-year-old Anya. 30-year-old Anya sits in the waiting room at 999. Erwin is finally let in by an attendant. Her grandfather looks frail. His clothes are too big for him. His head, walnut brown, is bald, except for a short white fringe from ear to ear. His cheeks have lost their friendly fullness, but his amber eyes are still as bright as ever. Anya waves. Tata! The attendant at the Queen Street Mental Health Center directs Erwin towards her. But her grandfather is hesitant. He seems afraid. Of course he would be, Anya thinks. She was only 18 when they last saw each other. That crazy day in the apartment when everything changed. Erwin turns away from Anya. The attendant places his hand firmly on Erwin's shoulder. It's okay. Your daughter Jaya is here. No, no, I'm Anya. I'm his granddaughter. Anya tries to embrace Erwin, but he backs away, gripping the attendant's arm. Anya persists. Don't worry, Tata. I'll be taking you. Is that your only bag? The attendant slowly pries Erwin's fingers off his arm and hands Anya an 8x10 envelope. These are his medical records, his medications, and instructions. He's fine. He's just nervous about the transition. The attendant returns to his work, leaving Erwin in Anya's care. Erwin is trembling. Jaya? No, silly, I'm Anya. She reverts to her childhood voice and taps out a rhythm on the back of her hand. Dammaro dam, meet Jayan gam, bolo subha sham, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Hare. You don't remember? Tata is still. Well, nothing is going to jolt his memory. You are here? Of course I am. You are alive? Yes, Tata. I'm very much alive. And I'm glad to see you are too. She squeezes his hand. I'm sorry I wasn't in touch with you all these years. I was in the States. I was playing music, different gigs, different groups, different genres. Anasuya? Erwin's voice cracks. Anasuya is dead, Anya says. She died. Erwin's eyes fill with tears. Anya brings him in for a hug, wrapping her arms around his frail body and releasing him. She picks up his small but densely packed canvas bag, throws it heavily over her shoulder, and guides him outside. So I'll stop there and maybe we can read something a little later. Is that okay?
Sure. I'm happy for you to read the entire book, but we'll be here till Christmas. Thank you so much for sharing that. If there's anybody here who, Sheila and I were talking about this earlier, if there's anyone here who's read the book and there's a section not a part of the denouement or anything that gives it away that you'd like to hear Sheila read, please let us know in the chat. I'm going to start with a writerly question, if that's okay. At the end of the novel, you share a personal family history and a bibliography of sorts. And as a writer, I don't read the ending first, but I always go to the back of the book to read the notes that the author wants us to read, after we've read the book. But I want to talk about the process of creating the novel. There was a lot of research that went into it. So I want to talk about that kind of writerly process and how much time you spent and where you did it and how you did it and all that kind of stuff before you sat down to write.
So I love this question because there's no like single correct answer here, right? I could say that I started this novel at 12 years old when my father told me a story that really inspired me. So this was when I had a history teacher and she asked us to write something about our ancestors. And I was growing up in Nova Scotia. My parents were immigrant doctors there. And I really didn't know that much about my relatives. So I ran home and said, Dad, tell me something about my ancestors. I've got to write this essay. And so he sat me down and he said, well, I'll tell you about how your grandfather won the war. And that sounded really fantastic. So he went on to tell me the story about how my grandfather opened the gates of Hyderabad city for the Indian army to come in and crush a rebellion that was percolating inside.
Right.
And that was pretty wild. And I wrote that down and I must have written something else because I filled out an essay. But at the same time, I think he told us that we were Dalits, or he didn't use that term. I think he used the term untouchables, so that in his lineage, we were descendants, or we were, in fact, the lowest caste or the untouchables. And I don't know whether he told me about this or I had read it elsewhere, but I read about how untouchables would have to sweep their footsteps along, as they walk down the street, so that no Brahmin who was coming down the street would be polluted by their footsteps. And I thought that is such a inhumane thing. But it got me interested, and I thought, oh, that's a part of my heritage now as well. So that started the curiosity. And I kind of forgot about that and I just lived my life. And then in 1994, I went back to India and I was working with a feminist theater group there. And they handed me a book called We Were Making History. And it was about the Telangana People's Rebellion and women's role in that rebellion. And it was
Mhm.
a communist rebellion against the Nizam and his multitude of landlords that were they had a feudal state at the time, and this was circa 1940s.
Yeah.
So that book was really interesting because I put two and two together and I realized that this was the rebellion that my father spoke about when he told me the story about how my grandfather opened the gates to the Indian army to crush a
Yeah.
rebellion. And that got me really interested. So I read that book. I also read another book that was really great called The Remembered Village, and that was by a social anthropologist who talked about villages at the time. And so
Mhm.
those two books kind of got me going. But the idea of the process was that I was reading, I was thinking about things, but I wasn't really writing a novel until around 1997, and I wrote a short story with
Yeah.
these great characters in it. And I guess over time, between collecting stories, reading books, and having these characters circulate in my mind, I came up with a story.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so your father mentioned that you were Dalits, which is the lowest caste in India at the time, the untouchables. Can you talk about the caste system as it exists in the novel and how you used, I'm so conscious of not giving away stuff when I'm talking, so I keep pausing. Give how you used the caste system in the intermingling of these families.
Yeah, so I mean, the caste system is very ancient, and actually, there is history that says that when the Dravidian people or the indigenous people in India, there was a kind of a caste system there that had to do with jobs. So,
Right.
blacksmiths and farmers and so on. And then when the Aryans came in to the Indus Valley in 1600 BC, or 500 BC,
Hmm.
um, they used that kind of societal structure to impose dogma. And so it became really codified, if you
Right.
want. And that further became codified when the British came, because then they started, really pulling out who are the scheduled caste, who are the other castes, and so on. So it's real. It is actually illegal in the Constitution of India to discriminate based on caste, but it
Hmm.
happens, just like discrimination happens in Canada,
Right.
racism and genderism and so on. It's illegal according to our laws, but people still exercise this.
Right.
So in the novel, I mean, it's funny because Outcast kind of makes it seem like it's all about caste, but it's about so many more things. But
Yeah.
certainly caste is illuminated here
Hmm.
because what we see throughout, in the 1940s and then it goes to the 1990s in Canada, we see how it gets played out um, in very subtle ways and in very overt ways.
Hmm.
And caste, you can be a Hindu in the caste system. Many people of lower castes converted to Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, in fact. And caste has its life of its own because you can have class and you can actually be educated and you can kind of transcend class in a sense. But caste can sometimes be there lurking behind. And if somebody knows your caste, they can use it against you. So I
Yeah.
kind of weave it in different ways just to show how these structures were very much about keeping people in bondage, right? In bondage slavery, but also can be used just as a bias, just to put somebody down. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And there was a section, a point in the novel where somebody was wanting to help or assist or do the job of an untouchable, of a Dalit, and it was like, no, 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 you can't. So it wasn't that even the Dalits or the untouchables couldn't, be considered higher. It was that you weren't even supposed to impose. If you were higher, you weren't supposed to impose yourself on the jobs of the lower castes, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think that was said in a kind of a humorous way in the novel where, the washer, the person
The
who
toilet,
washes
yeah, the
clothes
toilet.
only washes
the-
clothes, and the person who
Yeah,
sweeps the floors only sweeps the floors, right? And
yeah,
it's a very rigid area, and some of the lower castes would not, um, of course, do the scavenger work, which was cleaning toilets because that was below them, right? So
yeah,
there is this kind of strict occupational code, and also that sense of pollution, which is really horrendous.
yeah,
But I think that has got to be the most dehumanizing part of it, is that another human being could be quote unquote polluted by touching someone else or
yeah,
associate, that kind of association.
yeah,
And I think that is probably the thing that I really um, don't like. And really resist. And I think the
Yeah,
Dalit movement has talked about that in very strong ways about resisting those kind of laws of pollution, right? Which
right.
is quite indoctrined within Hinduism and the
Hmm.
doctrine there. But a
Yeah,
lot of people are fighting against it, both Brahmins and Dalits, right? So it's not that everybody believes in it for sure.
right, right. And so characters and their names play a role in that identity as well, right? So Malika, her name is both Hindu and Muslim. Irwin is Rayappa, but changes his name in order to, I think I can say this, erase his identity, kind of. So I want to talk about that too, how these characters' names came to be and how you fit them into who you what you wanted them to do and who you wanted to be in the story.
Yeah, so names are really important. And I think in many Indian languages, both, yeah, names carry meaning, right? And
Hmm.
and names are often can be very auspicious and so on. So um, sometimes the names actually depict a caste. So Rayappa is definitely a name that is recognizable in Telugu as being a lower caste name.
Right,
But somebody like Vijay, who is also a Dalit, that's an upper class name. But he is named that partly because his father is not a Dalit, right?
right, right.
And so, and we're not going to say who the father is, but
No.
um, I, and I think I like to play with that a little bit. And Malika or Malika, there's different pronunciations. I thought that was a nice turn too, because it can be a Hindu name with the two L's spelled with the two L's, or a Muslim name spelled with the one L. And there's a lot of, I think what happens in this novel, even though I do um, kind of create that architecture of caste and it's very
Right.
much present, I think I like to do a little shape shifting. So the idea that there is the one character in the novel who is in purdah. So purdah is where you wear a burqa
The birth.
and isolate yourself in a room or in a part of a house where men don't move through. And this person is actually Hindu. So what I'm doing in the novel, and it was practiced by Hindus in the Nizam state in
Hmm.
India, again, circa 1940s.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm trying to do is all of these kind of boxes or categories, they're slippery and they're not, you can't assume things, right? And there's a very interesting story about Lalita. She's a smaller character, but later on, what happens to her in the
Hmm.
novel, um, and how she is mistaken, um, in the novel because of her dress. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question, but that's
Yeah, no, I
that's
think
part of
it's
it.
I think what I was thinking about when I was reading as a, come from Canada reader, that I was thinking it must be interesting from an Indian reader's perspective to have these assumptions, right? So in reading the name VJ, they might be thinking things as they're reading the story so that when the revelation happens at the end, they would be, oh, like that
Aha,
more of
moment.
a makes sense kind of a revelation. But all of the characters, there are, a handful of main characters. There are a handful of kind of secondary characters, but you move quite easily and seamlessly in and out of perspectives as the novel moves forward. And I want to talk about that because there are revelations. And again, when I tell everyone who's listening that this novel is one of the most incredible slow burn novels you'll read in quite some time, I really mean it. The characters who reveal certain things in scenes, in dialogue, I was fascinated by, again, a writerly perspective, thinking how did Sheila decide who was going to reveal what, and from whose voice were we going to learn truths and things?
Yeah. Well, I think I would probably say as much as there is a, history is the background in this and the sort of the backbone, it's kind of the story unfolds on this wonderful history. And
Yeah,
just I'll just do a little aside before I answer your question, because there are people probably who haven't read the novel. So just to give you an idea, the novel is set between 1947 and 1997. A lot of the novel takes place around 1947, which most people will recall. That was when India achieved independence from the British.
mhm,
That's when there was partition between Pakistan and India, like two different countries were created. But in the middle of all of that happening, there's this huge land in central India, and it's the Kingdom of Hyderabad, and it is ruled by uh, 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 a princely ruler uh, called the Nizam. And they had an agreement with Britain. He had an agreement with Britain, sort of like a protectorate, but he did not want to join independence. He did not want to become part of the republic because he would have to give up his power.
right,
So, and he had a very feudal like it was a feudal society in the villages. But his city of Hyderabad was actually very progressive, lots of science, lots of art. And so there's these huge contradictions. So just to let you know, most of it happens in the Nizam's kingdom, and there's a revolution, a communist revolution that happens there when he refuses to join India. Then the communists call to arms, and they want to overthrow the Nizam and become a communist state. That's the history. Now the question, and that creates the backbone. The question you're talking about is like, who reveals what, and so on.
mhm,
And I think really, despite the history, this is a character-driven story. So I really had to, like, the characters were so strong. Like I didn't even have to try that hard. They were like really there. But if
yeah,
I was to get into Malika's head, right, um, she would do things, and it would just come out. Like she would do things and kind of lead me. Same with Erwin. He had so much conflict inside of himself
mhm,
that when he made decisions, he was always wanting to do the right thing. And poor fellow, don't I
yeah,
just don't know if he achieved that. Um, Maybe at the very end of the novel, perhaps, but he was always trying to do the right thing, but was always conflicted,
yeah,
partly because of the shame that he carried. And so I think the revelations came as were appropriate for the characters,
right,
right?
yeah,
Like, and sometimes they didn't even know to reveal. Like they learned about themselves and then they revealed something. So
yeah, yeah.
they're very much character driven.
And Irwin is like almost obsessive about these lists that he has, these categories that he thinks about and writes down in his journal. Again, that his list keeping, his categorizing of events, there are revelations within those as well. Can you expand a little bit more on Erwin Ryapa's this trait of his and how you decided to use it really as a narrative device? It's things are revealed in some of those lists, and I was surprised and impressed.
Thank you. I have to admit, I think the first time I started writing one of Irwin's lists was because I was getting a bit confused myself with
Right?
all the things that were going on. And I had to just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to make a list here of like who's who. I think that turned out to be the list quite close to the beginning. So it's not a
Yeah.
big, reveal, but it's a list he keeps about who he loves, who are the people who of which love was lost. Um, who does he have mutual love, right? So he categorizes his relationships, and but he is a social anthropologist and he's an academic and he is very ambitious and he's very meticulous, right? So, and he has very few possessions. And so
Yeah.
at the very beginning of the novel, he has very few possessions, very little money, and the almost like the articulation of what he has and how much it reveals how much they mean to him.
Hmm.
And so when then I think the reader feels it when he loses some of those
Yeah.
possessions because it's a part of him that is lost because they're so meaningful.
Mhm.
So part of those lists are his character, part of it is his way of making sense in the world,
Yeah.
and yeah, but
Yeah.
it does work, I think, as a device as well to help the reader.
It
Kind
was
of.
perfect. And the shoes, I thought the way that the his shoes, his tan leather shoes traveled in the book, I thought was also a really good idea, a writerly idea. Um, so talking about uh making lists, I had to at one point, and it was pretty close to the revelatory section of the book. I actually had to sit down and make my own little family tree, my own version of the family tree, people related, people not related, people who was who and who came from whom and all that kind of stuff. I I was so impressed in thinking, oh my gosh, how the heck did she get this novel from beginning to end out there with these relationships in her mind in the background of the novel? So, a question about love. How did you know, because the love stories in this novel are epic as the novel is, how did you know who was going to fall in love with whom and from whom people were going to exist?
What was the last word you said?
I don't want to say that again, actually, because
Okay.
that's how did you know who was going to fall in love with who? Period.
I didn't.
Okay, good.
I really didn't know who was going to fall in love because to me, this was not a love story. It did not begin as a love story. It certainly became quite a few. I mean, there are quite a few love
Yeah.
stories in it. But I had, you know, it wasn't really, I didn't start it that way. I started it more around this is the story of a revolutionary and a story of a, um, a young woman in Canada
Mhm.
and a revolutionary in India, and somehow they're connected, right? And
Mhm.
that's where the story began. And I think again, because of um, the characters were so strong. Sometimes there would be a scene about how two people meet or and it was almost like, oh, um, well, this scene, it just has this tension in it,
Mhm.
right? And you don't even know then if it's going to turn into love, but it would have some tension in it. And then the next scene, that tension would follow.
Right.
So in particular, again, I'm talking about a scene where Malika finds herself alone in the forest
Mhm.
and she meets somebody. I'm not going to say who. She
Yeah.
meets somebody, and there it's like laden with tension, because she's so nervous and scared. The other person isn't, and that tension then follows to the next time that they meet.
Mhm.
And it's almost like I didn't have to do anything. It followed the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even a scene which is so brief and so um minimally involved in the narrative. I'm talking about the relation. I think I can mention Pila, but I can't mention his love probably. But just the scene of him going into the forest and hugging a tree, that just that minimal love story had a huge impact on me as a reader. So I was grateful.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, so Pilla is a young, well, we meet Pilla as a boy when
Hmm.
he's about 14, and then we kind of follow his journey until he's a young adult. But he would probably be a lesser character.
Hmm.
But there's one scene in the car when he's traveling with his siblings and a friend. Um, and there's one little comment that he makes in the car that just kind of like, I'm going to leave that to you, but
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
little
yeah. No,
comment
I'm
he
like
makes
totally with
about the
you for sure.
friend, and it's just like, oh my God, there it is. And it was
Yeah,
this was not, the characters were not predestined. I didn't write, okay, this is the character and this is what they're like, and this is the another character. Like I didn't do
yeah,
that kind of outline of the novel or here are all the characters and here are what they, like sometimes I think
yeah.
authors write that way, very deliberate. But this was again, it was a reveal in the conversation in the car. They're riding along in the car on Tank Bund Road in Hyderabad, 1966, and looking at the
Yeah.
billboards, and it's this time of optimism. Indira Gandhi has just won the election, and there's these four very precocious teenagers in the back, and having this discussion about politics, and here's little Pilla making an observation about his
Yeah.
friend, and I think it's quite revealing. And that's it. Once he
Yeah,
makes that
yeah.
observation, it's
Yeah.
off to the races, right?
And that's probably why it ends up coming out as this like beautifully, heartbreakingly gorgeousness, even though it's just such a small part of the book. So history is quite obviously a big part of the book, but in the novel and in the references at the back, you talk about Gandhi, the impact he has on the Quit India movement. He doesn't actually exist in the novel, but they want people in the community want him to come to Hyderabad. But I kind of thought at a moment, I thought it could be so easy as a writer writing at this time to make Gandhi a kind of, whether fictionalized or not, bigger character in the book. But at the end, it actually feels like it has more impact because he does have such a like a there's an existence but not a reality to him in the novel. And I want to talk about him, Gandhi, as a
Yeah.
figure
So
in the book.
Gandhiji, of course, was a phenomenal person, character, hero um, in the Quit India movement, and incredible achievements really to bring such a large amount of people to join the Quit India resistance movement. Um, but most of the like if we think about India at that time was about 350 million people.
Hmm.
This is the 1940s. That's a lot of people. And during that time, like there was not one unified vision of what the subcontinent can look like, right? There was well, as you find out, there's a communist movement that is very strong in India during the time. There's Hindu fundamentalist movements. There's Islam fundamentalist movements. There's the nationalism, the secular nationalist movement that ended up sort of winning the day in the end. And most of the stories and the narratives we hear are about the Quit India movement, are about the partition between Pakistan and India. And so what was happening in Hyderabad at the time was quite devoid. I mean, the Quit India activists were also present in Hyderabad too.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but Gandhi was not as present. So he did visit Hyderabad in 1934 and visited Dalits and lived with
Mhm.
Dalits in Hyderabad for some time. But he actually didn't come during that period that I'm
Yeah.
talking about. And so the characters in the book, especially Rayappa, especially his mentor, Mr. Connolly, and the Reddy family too, they know about Gandhi. They kind of think, oh yeah, he belongs to the rest of India, but not, well, the Reddys think that he belongs to the rest of India, but he doesn't belong here. We have
Right.
the Nizam, we have the landlords who are mostly Hindus, have a good working relationship with the Nizam, who is Muslim, right, a
Mhm.
Muslim leader, and they don't think Gandhi has any place in Hyderabad.
Yeah.
But Connolly, who is the British scholar, and Rayappa, who is his assistant, they come to this small village in Korampally,
Hmm.
and they're excited about Gandhi because Gandhi is promising a secular India. He's promising like reaffirming Hindu qualities of life, So, the Khadi movement, right, where they're spinning their own cloth. The
Yeah.
the he talks about the integrity of like village economies and things like this. So they're really excited about that as social anthropologists. And what will this mean?
Yeah.
So he looms really large. But what happens in the course of the novel is that this hero idea of Gandhi is slowly kind of picked away at.
Hmm.
Like, so what is that relationship with the Dalits? And do the Dalits really embrace him, or are they resentful because he created this term Harijan, which means children of God, and it's seen
Right.
to be as condescending? Um, is Gandhi truly as progressive as he seems or he
Professes to
wants to
be.
be
Yeah.
seen as? And there's a really good article that Arundhati Roy writes. It's called The Doctor and the Saint. And she talks about Dr. Ambedkar, who is also mentioned in the novel, and he is a Dalit, but he is also he studied like a brilliant person. He became a lawyer, an economist, and a politician. He is credited with writing the Constitution of India,
Yeah.
and so she talks about him and his role and Gandhi's role and how there's the differences between them, the differences of perspective, especially regarding caste. And
Hmm.
it's critical of that. And I think that kind of weaves through. So I think if we were to have Gandhi play a larger role, he might have dominated because of
Yeah.
everybody knows him. But he really, in this history, believe it or not, he did not play a, a huge role.
Yeah.
He was
And
known.
I think that that's it, right? As a kind of Western based reader who was fed, you know, Western biased mediated reports of Gandhi and what he was doing and why he was doing it. I thought it was great that he could sort of exist in the book with that perspective, right? Like with whatever perspective the reader was bringing to the book and to that time. Kaylee, if anyone's worried about all of the names and references and stuff, Kaylee is very good at making notes of those. So when I post the video on YouTube, those all anything that Sheila has mentioned during this conversation will exist there. If you're racing to try and remember what Sheila mentioned. Does anyone else have any questions? I have a one sort of big question to close us off, but if anyone has any questions for Sheila, feel free to, you can ask Kaylee directly or put your hand up and we'll unmute you for a minute.
You know what when you were talking about the
Just wait.
lists, oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, no.
When you were talking about the lists, I don't know whether this gives things away, but I don't think it will. But I thought maybe I would read you a list
Of one of Rayapa's lists? For
of one of
sure.
Rayapa's lists. And this is when Rayappa goes to this small village in Korampally. He's studying with the scholar Connolly, and then he ends up leaving Karampala and he goes back to his hometown of Nellore, and he gets a government job. Okay, Rayappa lifted his head from the desk. He was in his office in Nellore, in his new job, in his new life. A round clock hung on the opposite wall. The minute hand ticked forward to 12. It was 4 p.m., the end of his break and the end of remembering. Rayapa stood and stretched, pulling open the metal drawer of the file cabinet. He imagined his memories of Korampali slipping from his mind into a crisp white folder. If one happened upon the folder and opened it, what would they find? A cow-fucking, red-faced Indophile anthropologist? A sheep-loving, bullock-minding, landlording, servicing 11-year-old slave? A bullock cart riding, rape orchestrating heir to 40,000 acres of land? A tree climbing, wall scaling, shit cleaning, world wondering girl turned woman? A tree drawing, grass weaving, caste disrupting, Mahatma washed Harijan? The shit cleaning month, the horror witnessing month, the innocence month of his life. The folder was full. Rayappa mentally filed it away under December 1947, marking it confidential.
That that is another. I'm glad that you read that. It's difficult. There are a few scenes in the book that are so powerful, but difficult to explain. The relationship that Connolly has in the barn is probably one of those one of those relationships we can't talk about. Um, if nobody has any questions, I am going to ask Sheila, what beautiful creative thing can we expect from you next? Are you working on another novel? Are you working on media stuff or another play?
Yeah. So, my joy project is an album of music because I'm a musician and it's music is my first love and it's my the it's just like a pure love. And so I've been working on some songs for a while, and so I do want to actually do an album. But yeah, there's another novel that's percolating in my mind and has been for a while, and I'm just kind of getting some thoughts down. And that has a completely different setting. In Nova Scotia, and that's where I grew up as a child. So I'll leave you with that. But yeah, lots of creative juices going, and I want to thank everybody before I hang up. My wonderful editor is on the call, Bethany Gibson. So just want to do a little
Oh,
shout out to Bethany, who helped me like get away, get you know what's to not get away, get rid of lots of stuff because I think this was 700 pages at one time in its
oh
life.
my gosh.
So, but editing is more than just that. But yeah, I want to shout out to Bethany and thank everybody who's on this call.
Mhm.
I see some friends and family and really wonderful. I also just want to do one more shout out also to my Aunt Mercy, who's on the call, who gave me a lot of the lovely names that are in this book. So thank you so much.
Hi, Mercy. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much. Bethany, we have Goose Lane is one of our favorite independent publishers. I strongly urge you to go to Goose Lane's website and see what they've got. We've got a bunch of Goose Lane authors coming to Junction Reads. Sheila, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Kaylee, as always, thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoys whatever time off you have over the next couple of months. We won't be back to Junction Reads until January 12th, and we'll be online with Jill Yonick Goldberg. And we'll be back in person January 26th at Type Books with Kate Cayley, Robin Pacific, and Nicola Winstanley. And I'm also going to do a First 30, which is an Instagram live thing that we do. It's a writerly thing on December 3rd with Adele Purdom and her collection of essays. And I think that's it. Kaylee, anything? This is your last chance. If anyone's here and they're like, I'm dying to ask this question, this is your last chance to raise your hand and say something. Otherwise, I'm
Well,
grateful.
I will just say thank you so much, Allison and Kaylee, for hosting me. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody.